So today we're going to talk about reimagining your soul. Um, what if you could take some time to see things about your life in a different way? That's what we want to talk about today. And this was a quote that I shared with everyone last week. It says that there's a part of you that was left behind very early in your life, a part that never felt completely received. It is full of fears. Meanwhile, you grew up with many survival skills, but you want yourself to be one. And so we talked about all these different emotions that we feel and different parts of us that tend to come out at different times. But even in all that struggle, really what we want is to be one. And so I think Henri Nouwen had it right here to kind of call this to our attention. He said that in his book, The Inner Voice of Love. What I want to talk about for a moment is, why do we need to have boundaries for our souls? Well, why do we need boundaries? Well, the Apostle Paul said it in Romans 7 and verse 15. He said, I don't really understand myself, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. So this man struggled with this internal battle inside himself. And I think many of us can resonate with that. But as far as our soul goes, Dallas Willard said some helpful things about the soul. He said that the soul includes all the non-physical dimensions of a person. So think about your physical dimensions and put that aside for a moment, and then think about all the other parts of you. All those emotions that we have talked about recently. Those are part of what would constitute your soul. And a soul can be significantly reprogrammed, he said. And this is what is a major part of what happens in spiritual formation or spiritual reformation. When we spend time getting to know God and we spend time getting to know ourselves, and the intersection of what we know about ourselves and what we know about God, that there's a point of reformation that can happen there in our lives. And when that happens, what's happening is our soul is literally being reprogrammed or being changed. We are reforming the contents or contours, rather, of our inner life. We're reshaping, we're redefining our thoughts and our feelings, and we hope eventually our actions will come in line with the better thoughts and better feelings that we would be feeling as we work through the process of spiritual formation. As we talk about boundaries for your soul, one of the things that we recognize is that we need to have boundaries with people. And so I'm going to try to explain the boundaries of the soul with this idea of having boundaries with other people. So when we have boundaries with other people, what happens is we can draw closer to other people. So we may recognize that we're farther away from someone than we really want to be, and we can draw closer to them. Okay. And then we can also realize that there are times when we might have been too close to somebody. Right now, a lot of us are spending a lot of time with our family. And for some of us, we may need a little distance. I know for me, in the last several months, it helped me tremendously to set aside a room where I could go and do the work that I needed to do apart from my family, because trying to do it in the midst of all the things that were happening in my house was very difficult. So I needed to set a boundary there in order to get my work done. But we know that there are times when getting further away from somebody or establishing a comfortable distance from someone can be a good thing. In some of our families growing up, we may have been involved in a relationship which we would call as enmeshed. Like we're too close, so that when something happens in your life, I may fall apart because I am so close to you. I can't tell where I start and you end, or where you start and I end. We're too close. And so we can recognize that with people. And so what we want to talk about today is how does that work with our souls? So, or with our emotions, we also need to have boundaries. If I'm too close to my emotion, this week I felt annoyed about something. If I get too close to that emotion, that emotion can overwhelm me and take over. Now I'm going to be interacting with everyone out of this sense of being annoyed. But if I'm too far away from this emotion of being annoyed, I can get cut off from that feeling only to be influenced by it in harmful ways later on. So if I completely discount it and say, you know what, I'm just going to stop being annoyed, and I try to beat it down and act like it's not there, it's probably going to come back later to bite me. And I think I have a picture that kind of illustrates what happens. Here's a grown man playing the whack-a-mole game at Chuck E. Cheese or one of these places. You whack a mole down, or you whack an emotion down and try to deny it or try to get rid of it very quickly. What happens is it's going to pop up in another place, another time, so that I might not act annoyed to that person who sent me that email this week, but I might act out of that sense of being annoyed to my family or someone else. So taking a U-turn is an important part of the process that we're going to talk about over the next few weeks. And so this is where the overwhelming parts of your soul are presenting an opportunity for growth and for healing in your life. So that internal conflict that you're feeling over any of these emotions is growth trying to happen. And as Christians, we recognize that God is always at work within us. It says that he started a good work in us and he will perform it. And he is performing that. And so all this stuff that we have, this internal conflict, is an opportunity for us to grow. So the most helpful thing is for me to notice, the most helpful thing for me to notice is my reaction, not to focus on the action of others or someone who sent me an email or sent me a message this week that I didn't appreciate, but it's to focus on what's my reaction to that particular person or what they've said or done. And the reason is because I can't change others. All I can change is myself. So focusing on someone else and what they're doing isn't really going to get me anywhere. First, I need to start with myself and my own reaction to what's going on. And once I am able to help myself, maybe I can step into their point of reference and help them or get to know them better. So the U-turn helps so that we can gain clarity about our own thoughts and feelings so that we can respond to other people intentionally instead of being overwhelmed by our own emotion and interacting with them out of that emotion. Taking a U-turn, this is what it is, and we're going to spend the coming weeks diving into each one of these steps, but I'm just going to kind of lay it out for you now so you know what it is. Step one is focusing on that overwhelming part of yourself. So this week I felt annoyed, so I spent some time thinking about focusing on why was I annoyed. Step two, I need to befriend this part that I don't like. I don't like that I get annoyed when I get an email or a message from someone that I don't like. I don't like that part of me. I wish I didn't have that part. I wish I could get upsetting things and it not upset me, right? But I befriended this part of me to say, why is this happening? And let me see if I can help this part of me that's feeling overwhelmed. Step number three is to invite Jesus to draw near to that particular part of you that's feeling that overwhelm. And as soon as I did this step this week, that overwhelm that I had really calmed down. And so the idea is allowing Jesus to come near to these parts that we really don't like and wish we could get rid of. Step number four is to unburden this weary part. So that part of me that gets annoyed is a part of me that wants me to be perfect and wants everyone else that I interact with to be perfect. That's a tremendous burden that part of me is carrying. So as soon as I can unburden that and give that to God, the better off I'll be. That's step number four. And then step number five is to integrate this part of me that can get annoyed into the other internal team of rivals. So I have other emotions and other parts of me down in there other than being annoyed. And sometimes these parts are at odds with one another. They're not working well together. And so the idea is to be able to integrate these into a team that will work together and not work against themselves. This is an ancient struggle. I'm not the first one to struggle with this kind of thing. Adam and Eve struggled with it. They gave into a part of them that wanted to be like God. They were overwhelmed with this emotion that they could be gods. Sarah in the Old Testament is an example where she gave into a part of herself that felt that she was too old for God's promises to really come true in her life. She was too old to have a child, and God said that she would have a child, and that that child would make a huge difference in the world and in history. She gave into that part, and she decided to take matters into her own hands, just like Adam and Eve decided to take matters into their own hands. David's another example who gave into this part of him, this desire part, we could call it, this desire to have a woman that wasn't his wife. And then he gave into a part of him that tried to scheme and tried to cover over his sin. And then eventually he gave into an angry part that said if he couldn't solve his problem in a peaceful way, he would kill a man to get what he wanted, to cover himself over, to cover over what he had done. And then Peter gave into a part of him that wanted to deny Jesus. Of course, there's a part of him that didn't want to deny Jesus because he told Jesus he would never deny him, but he ended up doing it because there was a part of him that wanted to do that wanted to save his own skin. And what's the common thread in all these stories is that each one of these people were overwhelmed by strong emotion, and that strong emotion took over. This is an ancient struggle. We talked about it earlier, Paul's internal struggle between right and wrong. James, who was Jesus' earthly brother, had a struggle, and he expressed it as that we are double-minded. It's almost like we have two minds, or two parts of our mind are competing against each other. And honestly, who's going to be able to deliver us from this terrible struggle? Some of us are well along in years now, and we have been struggling with these emotions for literally our whole lives. Who's going to deliver us from this terrible struggle? Well, let's go back to David. How did David get out of the tailspin of trouble that he created in his own life? In Psalm 131 and verse 2, David says, I have calmed down and quieted my soul like a child within me. Let me read that again. I have calmed down and quieted in my soul like a child within me. So we recognize from his words here, one, that there's a sense of calmness that needs to come over our overwhelmed emotions. And we also see that we need to be active in that process. It's not a passive process. He says, I have calmed down. Obviously, he didn't do that alone. He did that with the help of God, but he was able to, with God's help, to calm down, to quiet his soul. And it says, like a child within him. So if you think about all these overwhelming emotions that we have within us, all these emotions, for the most part, we learned to deal with when we were children. And most of us probably struggled based on how we didn't learn the things we needed to learn as children when we were dealing with these emotions. Maybe our parents didn't get very good instructions on emotions from their parents, and so they passed on to us ways of coping that weren't exactly the best thing for us. So these parts of us are like children that need to grow up and mature, especially in our faith. And so then this ancient struggle, what's really key in the ancient struggle is this power of compassion. So our goal is to learn when to say yes and how to say no to our thoughts and feelings. When to say yes and how to say no to our thoughts and feelings. How to bring what we know of God with us into what we're experiencing at any given moment and enjoy the benefits of having boundaries that would benefit our soul. So we want to bring what we know of God with us into any given experience so that we can enjoy the boundaries that God would want us to have with our soul, and especially these overwhelming emotions. So the power of compassion becomes really key. And if you think about compassion, really fits well with that last slide where we were talking about David quieting himself like a child. How do you help a child? You help a child by being compassionate to that child. So most of the things I'm talking about are coming from a book called Boundaries for Your Soul by Allison Cook and Kimberly Miller. I encourage you to pick up a copy of it so you can follow along and read about it as we're talking about it here on a weekly basis. And the second resource I encourage people to look into is a movie called Inside Out. And this is somewhat what the cover will look like. And this is a great animated story, kids kind of movie, but I think it's one of the best movies that illustrates the principles that we're talking about here on a weekly basis. So I encourage you to check those out.